Mr. President,
Senator from Delaware.
I appreciate the yielding by Senator Whitehouse. Let me just say, if your provision, Senator Whitehouse, it doesn't end up in this bill, and we actually do pass it, we will conference, I'm sure, with the House, and there will be an opportunity to revisit this issue. So I just hope you'll stay in touch with those of us who might be fortunate enough to be a conferee.
I appreciate that very much, more than the senator can know.
Good, thank you. Well, Mr. President, I rise today in support of the cybersecurity information bill introduced by our colleagues, Senators Burr and Feinstein. I want to commend my colleagues and their staff for their leadership, for their tireless efforts on this extremely important piece of legislation. As a ranking member and former chairman of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, Mr. President, I've been following cybersecurity and this information sharing proposal in particular literally for years. In fact, when Senator Feinstein first introduced an information sharing bill in 2012, that was like 2 or 3 Congresses ago, it was referred to the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs in which I served. This bill was ultimately folded into a comprehensive cybersecurity bill that I had the honor of co-sponsoring with Senators Joe Lieberman and Susan Collins, Jay Rockefeller, and Senator Feinstein. We were not able to pass that bill, but I think it's paved the way for other cyber legislation, including the bill that's before us today and a number of the amendments that are going to be offered to that bill, and the Manager's Amendment especially. Last Congress, Mr. President, I worked with Ranking Member in Homeland Security, Dr. Tom Carper, and our House counterparts to get not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 cybersecurity bills enacted into law signed by the President. I believe these 4 bills laid a very strong foundation for some significant improvements on how the Department of Homeland Security carries out its cybersecurity mission, and really for this bill before us too. What the legislation that Dr. Carper and I worked on during the last Congress did in essence was to better equip the Department of Homeland Security to operate at the center of the kind of robust information sharing program that the Burr-Feinstein bill would set up. How did it do that? One, to make sure that the Department of Homeland Security would have the ability to attract and retain top flight talent, much like the National Security Agency already has. Legislation that actually takes something called the Cyber Ops Center, the NCIC, within the Department of Homeland Security and make it real and functional and an entity that people would use and listen to. And finally, to take an old law called FISMA, Federal Information Sharing Management Act, and to take something that was just a paperwork operation, this FISMA legislation, like a once-in-a-year check to see how cybersecure an agency might be, and to turn it into not a paperwork operation, not a once-every-365-day operation, but a 24/7 surveillance operation, on the lookout for intrusions across federal government broadly. And that legislation, affectionately known as FISMA, that legislation was also designed to make clear what the division of labor was between the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, and the Department of Homeland Security under the protecting the .gov domain. Made it clear that the job of OMB is to, if you will, to steer the ship. The job of Department of Homeland Security is to row the ship, to row the boat. And that's a good division of labor, given OMB only has 6 employees who work on this stuff. Department of Homeland Security has hundreds. So I think we figured out the sharing of labor, the division of labor, and also made sure that the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, has the resources, and the technology that they need. And Mr. President, sharing more cybersecurity threat information among and between the private sector and the federal government players who are on the front line in cybersecurity is critical to our national security. And over the last couple of years, we've witnessed many troubling cyber attacks against our banks, but not just our banks, against retailers, against health providers, government agencies, and God knows how many others. Some of those launching these attacks, they're just criminals. Some of them are just criminals, but they want to steal information. They want to make money off of our personal information, off of our intellectual property, like our intellectual seed corn, if you will, for companies large and small, for universities as well. Others just want to be disruptive, or they want to make political points. Some actors, however, are capable, or would like to develop the capability to use a cyber attack to harm people and cause physical damage. It's long past time for this body to take action to more effectively combat these threats that we now face in cyberspace. And that's why earlier this year I introduced a similar information sharing bill. This bill largely mirrored the administration's original proposal. President's administration asked me to introduce their information sharing bill. Before I did that, we actually had a hearing in the Committee on Homeland Security. Part of the centerpiece of the hearing was the information by the administration's proposal. We got some good ideas on how to make it better. We made it better and introduced that bill to use as a, if you will, a counterpoint in a constructive, positive way with the legislation that worked its way through the Intelligence Committee. But we didn't stop there. We took input from a lot of experts and stakeholders, and the measure we are discussing today shares the same goals as my original bill, largely the administration's original bill, to increase the sharing of cyber threat information between the federal government and the private sector and between different entities within the private sector. And I'm pleased that we're finally discussing these critical issues on the Senate floor. The substitute amendment we're debating today makes a number of improvements to the bill that was first made public after the Intelligence Committee reported it out. It also includes several changes that I, as well as several of my colleagues, have been calling for, including the chairman of our committee. I'd like to thank Senators Burr and Feinstein. I want to thank their staffs for working closely with our staffs and others to produce what I believe is just a significantly smarter bill and stronger bill. Is it perfect? No, not yet. But I like to say there's always room for improvement. And this is why we still have a debate on a number of amendments that have been made in order. And for those, like the one mentioned by Senator Whitehouse, that one that may be germane in a different kind of way in conference. And while there may not be agreement on everything in this bill, I believe that most of our colleagues will come to the conclusion that it really will help to improve our nation's cybersecurity, and by extension, our national security, and by extension, our economic security. First, the bill would ensure that the our government, is providing actionable intelligence to private sector entities seeking to better protect themselves in cyberspace. Businesses around our country are hungry for information they can use to fend off attacks and better protect their systems and their customers. This bill would make the federal government, a much stronger partner for them. Many companies that I've talked to of late also want to share more information with the federal government about what they're seeing online every day, but they're unsure of the rules of the road. And in other words, Mr. President, companies want more predictability, they want more certainty when it comes to working with our government. This bill would give them that by clarifying that they won't be putting themselves in legal jeopardy if they choose to share cyber threat information with our federal government. But if companies do want to avail themselves of the legal protections the bill offers, they would have to, with just two narrow exceptions, use the information sharing portal at the Department of Homeland Security. This puts the Department of Homeland Security, a civilian entity, at the center of the information sharing process. And I think this is a smart and the right thing to do. In fact, many experts and companies that I've talked to across the country, as recently as last week out in Silicon Valley and out on the West Coast, and they agree with what I've just said. And I know many Americans are uneasy with companies they do business with directly handing over data to an intelligence or law enforcement agency. The Department of Homeland Security will carry out its responsibilities under this bill through its cyber center that I mentioned, cyber ops center I mentioned earlier. It's called the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center. That's a mouthful. We call it affectionately the NCIC, but it's a cyber ops center. It includes folks from DHS, other federal agencies. It includes a number of representatives of financial services, utility industry, retail industry, and so forth as well. All together on one roof, talking together, working together to help support one another and make it strong, more secure. One of the bills I worked on with Dr. Coburn last Congress formally, as I said earlier, authorized this center. We're pleased to see that this bill would make the most out of the resources that we've already invested in the Cyber Ops Center, the NCIC. Earlier this month, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, that's Jay Johnson, told our Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, he said that beginning in November, the Cyber Ops Center, the NCIC, will have the capability to automate the distribution and receipt of cyber threat indicators. I'll say that again, to automate the distribution and the receipt of cyber threat indicators that they receive from others, including those in the private sector. In other words, Mr. President, the Department of Homeland Security will have the ability to share information with other agencies in real time. Not next month, not next week, not tomorrow, not in an hour, but in real time, and which is really what this little bill before us today requires. Now, I know that real-time sharing is incredibly important to the bill's sponsors. It's important to me and probably many of our colleagues and stakeholders. Equally important, however, is the ability of the Department of Homeland Security to apply what I call a privacy scrub to the information the information that it receives from industry, the threat indicators that come from industry, see something, say something, stuff that they send to the Department of Homeland Security. We allow in the amendment that I've, the bill that I authored with others in my committee, including our chairman, the ability for the Department of Homeland Security to, if you will, receive information through its portal from various entities that witness threat indicators, to see it and to put it through the portal, to bring it through the portal, to do a privacy scrub. And that's one of the things the Department of Homeland Security has expertise in doing. I use the example at a lunch earlier today, Mr. President, I talked about baseball. I know the presiding officer has some interest in baseball with a team called the Phillies in Philadelphia, the Pirates in Pittsburgh. And I would just say to him, thinking about baseball for a minute, let's say you're in the playoffs. Let's say you're a team, you're in the playoffs, and you're in the ninth inning, and you need to get somebody out of the bullpen to close. You have a one-run lead. And you look to the bullpen. He's now retired, but Mariano Rivera, best closer in baseball history. You got Mariano Rivera in the bullpen to come in and close out the game. And you have three other guys you just called up from minor leagues, or maybe from AAA. And you just say, well, who do I put in to close the game? Do I put in the best closer we've ever had in baseball history, or do I bring in three rookies, three minor league guys? Well, you'd bring in Mariano Rivera. And when it comes to be able to do privacy scrubs, the Department of Homeland Security, this is what they do. This is what they do, and now they have the horses and the ability and the technology to do it even better. I know some of my colleagues are concerned that a privacy scrub would slow down the information sharing process. I share those concerns, but I have been assured by the department, the right smart people at the Department of Homeland Security, that less than 1% of the information it receives would actually ever need to be reviewed by a human, by a person. The rest, roughly 99%, would be shared with other agencies at machine speed. Bingo. I'm very pleased that DHS has come to agreement on this process with its agency partners, and will be up and running with a portal the way that I've described just in the next couple of weeks. One of the amendments I filed, Mr. President, speaks to this privacy scrub process. It would make clear that the Department of Homeland Security could carry out an automated privacy scrub in real time and without delay. In fact, my amendment would add just one word to the bill so the DHS could continue to automatically remove irrelevant or erroneous data from cyber threat information. I'm very happy that Senators Burr and Feinstein have taken this amendment into consideration, have now modified their substitute amendment to make sure that the Department of Homeland Security can do what it does best, and that is to apply a privacy scrub, pulling out personally identifiable information and stuff, along with threat indicators that actually shouldn't be passed on to other federal agencies. The substitute amendment now calls on DHS to work with its agency partners to agree on a process to share information while protecting privacy. This is a process that DHS is already undertaking. And I want to thank Senators Burr, Senator Feinstein, as well as our friends at the Department of Homeland Security and other agencies for working so hard to find agreement on this language and for working with my staff and me on this important matter. Another amendment that I put forward this time with Committee Chairman Senator Johnson aims to improve what we call cyber hygiene across the federal government and prevent attacks against federal agencies. This language is based on a bill that Senator Johnson and I introduced and had reported out of our Homeland Security Committee by a unanimous vote. And the amendment does three main things. First, it would require all federal agencies to implement specific best practices and state-of-the-art technologies to defend against cyber attacks. For example, we had experts testify about the importance of strong authentication and data encryption. This amendment would make sure that agencies are taking these common sense steps to bolster their cybersecurity. Second, the amendment would accelerate the deployment and adoption of the Department of Homeland Security's Cyber Intrusion and Detection Program. It's known as Einstein, as in Albert Einstein, but you don't have the Albert in the name of this technology. It's called Einstein. And for my colleagues that may not be familiar with Einstein, I mean, with respect to Homeland Security and cybersecurity, let me just take a couple of minutes to describe its main features. Einstein, we have Einstein 1, president at the beginning, Einstein 2, a follow-on technology, and then there's Einstein 3. Einstein basically analyzes internet traffic entering and leaving federal civilian agencies to identify cyber threats and to try to stop attacks. The system's been rolled out in phases over the last several years. Einstein 1, this is the first step. It sees and actually records internet traffic, much like a guard at a checkpoint watching cars go by. Maybe you're writing down recording the license plates. Einstein 2 detects anything out of the ordinary and sets off alarms if a piece of malware is trying to enter a federal network. For example, a car comes through and not supposed to come through. That would set off an alarm and enable Einstein 2 to actually detect a cyber intrusion. Einstein doesn't do anything about blocking. Doesn't block the car, doesn't, in this example. But Einstein 3, the Einstein 3A, latest version, and uses unclassified and classified information to actually block the cyber attack. So initially, Einstein 1, record what's being detected. Einstein 2, to actually detect bad stuff coming through the, in terms of an intrusion. And Einstein 3A, to block it. The problem is less than half of our federal civilian agencies actually have Einstein 3A in place. So they have the ability to record intrusion, ability to detect an intrusion, not the ability to block an intrusion. They need the ability to block, and what our legislation would do would be to make sure that agencies have Einstein in place, including the ability to block intrusions within 1 year. Finally, our amendment incorporates the language originally drafted by Senators Susan Collins, former the chair of the Homeland Security Committee, and a great colleague of ours for many years, Senator Mark Warner, Kelly Ayotte, Claire McCaskill, Senator Dan Coates, and Barbara McCloskey. They're all co-sponsors of the amendment that Senator Collins has offered. And these provisions would strengthen the Department of Homeland Security's ability to shore up cyber defenses at civilian agencies and to address cyber emergencies across the federal government. I am, again, just incredibly grateful that Senator Feinstein and Senator Burr agreed to include our language in the substitute amendment, language that worked its way through our committee. We had hearings on this stuff and had the opportunity to mark up the legislation. So what good, it's the way this place is supposed to work, and I think, without exception, had bipartisan support coming through our committee. It's a perfect complement of the information sharing bill that we are discussing this week. It makes a good bill, I think, that much better. And I want to thank the senators for working with me and Senator Johnson on it. Before I close, Mr. President, just one more thing. I know the presiding officer thinks a lot about root causes. And rather than just address symptoms of problems, let's think about what is the root cause of the problem. The fellow who's waiting to follow me here on the floor, the former governor of Maine, thinks similarly. I do too, recovering governors. And it's not just enough to address the symptoms of these problems. A part of what we need to be thinking about is, how do we go to root cause? How do we go to root cause? And until fairly recently, a lot of our financial services institutions in this country were under constant attack by somebody trying to just overload their website and essentially try to shut them down. Sort of like, remember when we were first standing up the Affordable Care Act, and they had so much traffic on their website, it kind of would break down. Well, there are folks, cyber threats from around the world. We think Iran was behind it. And they were trying to do that to our bring down our financial services business, and sometimes with some success. About a year ago, when we got really serious about negotiating with the Iranians and our partners, the French, the Brits, the Germans, the Russians and the Chinese, some kind of agreement where the Iranians would give up any hope they had of a nuclear weapon in terms for lifting our economic sanctions. When it became clear that those were serious negotiations and that something might actually happen from those negotiations, guess what happened to those attacks? They call them DDoSs. What do you suppose happened? Well, guess what? They started letting up, little by little, until the time we actually voted here to let that agreement be enacted and hopefully be administered and implemented. That was a root cause being addressed, a root cause. Another root cause you had over in China for years. The Chinese have sought to use cybersecurity to get into some of our most successful businesses, some of our research and development operations in those businesses. Work being done within federal agencies on research and development. Actually, the intellectual seed code for creating jobs and opportunity in this country. The cyber attacks from what then we believe was China, trying to steal information from our universities. They were doing a lot of research that could lead to economic activity and job creation. And we didn't like it. We don't do that. We don't do that to them, and we didn't want them to do that to us. We complained about it, called out some of the folks who we thought was behind us in China. And President Xi visited us here in this country, in the city, about 3 weeks ago. And he and our president had some tough, direct, probably not entirely comfortable conversations. And one of them dealt with this issue. And it is what we believe the intrusion by the Chinese actors to steal our intellectual seed cord in order to maybe get a shortcut to economic development, economic activity, not have to spend the money, the time, and the energy to do all the research that would lead to this innovation, job creation activity. The agreement that came out of that was the Chinese and our country have agreed to that neither side will knowingly steal this kind of information from the other. And knowingly is a pretty broad term, and so we have to make sure that knowingly actually means something. And the Secretary Jay Johnson, head of Homeland Security Department, and our Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, they've been assigned to build on this initial agreement and see what we can make of it. I'll close with this. A lot of people in our country don't understand what all this cybersecurity stuff is, and intrusion and Einstein and all the stuff that we're talking about here that's in the legislation that's before us this week. They do know this. They do know this. It's not good when people can sell and steal the kind of information that needs to be protected, whether it's in part of the government domain, whether it's military, intelligence secrets, whether it's economic secrets that lead to, or developments that lead to economic gain. But where there's personally identifiable information, it can be used for blackmail purposes or to monetize and to somehow make money off of that information. We just know it's not good. We know it's not good. And there's no one silver bullet to actually stop this kind of activity. But there are a lot of silver BBs, and some of them are pretty big. Some of them are pretty big. The legislation that's before us today, bolstered by some legislation that's come out of the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, a couple of pretty good-sized BBs. And they're not going to enable us to win this war by themselves, but will enable us to make real progress and feel a good bit more secure than we have. And with the knowing that this is an enemy across the globe, a number of enemies that wish us harm, and they're not going to give up. There's a lot of money involved, and they'll be back at us. And we have to bring our A game to work every day. Every day. The Department of Homeland Security and our other federal agencies working in tandem with the private sector. And hopefully with this legislation, the folks in the private sector, if they want to get the liability protection and sharing information with the federal government, we want them to use the portal through the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security, to the extent that privacy scrub is needed, and it's not often happens, less than 1% of the time with the information that comes through the portal. But legislation before us with the amendments that are offered will enable us to have that kind of security about our private information, and at the same time to do a very good job, much better job, in protecting what is valuable to us. Mr. President, I think that's about it for me, and I appreciate very much the opportunity. Thank very much the patience of Senator King over here, and I will yield the floor to him. I'll just say in closing, Senator Blunt. Senator Blunt, I'm going to yield to you next. And it's good to be with both of you and look forward to working with you on these and with respect to the gentleman from Missouri, related matters very closely. Thanks so much.